Hello, Lyssa deHart here. Today I want to walk through Core Competency 8, which is facilitates client growth. It's part of the final cluster of competencies that are part of the ICF Core Competencies, and it's really around how a coach partners with a client to transform the learning and awareness that has come out of the coaching conversation into forwarding the action. It also is really there to promote the client's autonomy and agency in taking actions for themselves, discovering for themselves what their learning was, and discovering for themselves what actions are going to most support their awarenesses that they've had, and then how they're going to move forward with those things. So I'm not going to read all 9 of the markers. I will put them in here so that you can read them yourself. But I want to invite you to consider that facilitating client growth does not happen in a vacuum. It's really part of the larger container of a coaching conversation. You have the beginning facilitation piece, which is around establishes and maintains agreements. We're really trying to discover what is important that the client wants to work on. What would success look like at the end of the conversation? Where does the client want to explore, and what's meaningful and important to them to uncover so that they can move towards what they want to have by the end of the conversation. So conversely, you have the second bookend, which is facilitating client growth, which is the place where we may be stopping through the coaching conversation and checking in with a client. What's going on? How are we doing on moving towards what you said was important? I'm going to take an example of my own coaching where the client wanted to have more clarity around decision making. And so we're moving from confusion towards clarity in the conversation, clarity being a success measure for the conversation. As I'm going through the conversation, though, I may check in. How are we doing right now on finding clarity? What else needs to be explored that would give you more clarity? And so I'm anchoring towards the end as I'm going through the coaching conversation. And so one of the markers in facilitates client growth is, checking in on progress with your client. That would be a demonstration of that. There's also at the end of a coaching conversation where we're looking at the time and we know that we have a bit of time left, but we're moving towards closing this conversation and having the client have a complete session. And we may be asking, what have you learned today about yourself in this bigger picture? What are your insights and awarenesses? What are your takeaways, right? There are all these different ways that we ask these sort of closing the conversation so that the client has access to what they discovered through the inquiry of the conversation they've already had. What actions support those awarenesses that you've had? What are the things that might get in the way of you taking the actions that you have just discovered for yourself? We want to be asking these questions because what they invite the client to do is to work through things that might get in the way that are unconscious for them at the moment, but might become conscious for them as soon as they say them. So for instance, I had a coaching conversation and I asked the client, what are the actions that you're going to do to support these awarenesses? And she came up with a list, like a list of things that she was going to do. And typically she was a client who had always followed through on the things that she had agreed to do. But for whatever reason that day I said, is there anything that might get in the way of doing all these actions? Probably because she'd come up with so many of them. And she said, oh, I'm going on vacation tomorrow and I'll be gone for the next 3 weeks. And it's like, are there actions that might be appropriate for a holiday? Because maybe all these actions that you came up with might not be so useful, right? And so she was like, oh, I'm going on vacation. So then how would you modify these actions to really support moving this forward for yourself so that you can also be on holiday, but also so that you don't miss the learning that you've just discovered for yourself? And she was able to come up with new actions that were supportive, like she was going to journal about it and reflect on it some. So it's really, again, a way of helping the client to close the conversation, but also to anchor their learning. What might be getting in the way? What have you discovered about yourself? How can you apply that to a situation? Sometimes it is things like I haven't been setting healthy boundaries, or maybe it is I've been letting my inner critic talk too much, and so it stopped me from being able to take action. Whatever that is, the client may still be having awarenesses as a result of the questions that you're asking, but it is really around the coach helping the client to support their own insights and awarenesses. It's about the agency of that self-generated awareness that we want the client to walk away with. And again, it's also this, how would you like to close this session? For me, I often ask, is there anything that you still needs to be named into the space as we come to a close of the conversation? That's one way of doing it, not the best necessarily, but a way. There's many ways though that we celebrate the learning, we acknowledge the client's insights and awarenesses, and we really support them to anchor and partner in the closing of the conversation. So I hope this was useful to you, and I look forward to seeing you on another video.